Okay, guys, welcome to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I take a look at the 2011 film Season of the Witch, starring Nicolas Cage and Ron Perlman. It has an 11% on the tomato meter and a 30% on the audience score. It's certainly rotten, and well, that's why we're here today, right? And I'll agree, this is rotten. I wouldn't say it's anything but rotten. And it's kind of sad because the idea, the premise of it is interesting. I found it interesting before I actually watched it. And that simple premise for this story is that two deserters from the Crusades, two knights in the service of the Catholic Church, they are, well, they're deserters and they run away from the Crusades for their own moral purposes. Now, they are recaptured again by forces of the Catholic Church, and in exchange for their freedom, they are pressed into service to escort a suspected witch, a young girl who is suspected of being witched, to a remote fortress, also of the Catholic Church, in which she is going to be somehow the key in ending the plague that has infested Europe, because it is believed in this story that, the plague, the Black Death or whatnot that has decimated Europe is in fact the result of some kind of witchcraft, and this witch, she needs to be taken to this remote monastery fortress to somehow reverse the process and save everybody. That's the basic premise of it. And it opens, the opening of this is completely fine, and it doesn't strike me as rotten. It starts out as showing that the Catholic Church and the priests are executing witches, and at least one out of the three witches are actual witches, in the sense that they are evil, certain servants of Satan, and they have powers. Of course, two out of three are actually innocent people, but at the opening scene of the movie, we're shown that yes, there are real witches being killed by the Catholic Church, and that's the story in the nutshell. One of these suspected witches is to be escorted by Nicolas Cage and Ron Perlman's characters to this remote monastery, and along the way, a lot of things ensue. I certainly found that interesting at the beginning, but then it just goes horribly wrong and it becomes rotten in a lot of different ways, and I'll discuss that as we continue. Let's get right into the audience reviews. We have one from November 17th of 2019, which is less than a month ago. 3 stars. Cage and Perlman both performed a good dynamic with compassionate charisma and an engaging story, till the disorganized setting and effortless, uninteresting action bits changed from the simple psychological route it should have remained, one regarding its subject to a disappointing CGI-driven fate. That's a lot of strange rambling on words. It's not a very effective review, but let's just say this reviewer is saying that they wished this would have remained some kind of psychological drama rather than turned into a CGI demon fight at the end, and I can kind of agree with that. It started out as more of a question on whether, this young girl was a witch or whether everybody just thought she was, and Nicolas Cage's character is conflicted from the beginning because in his backstory he comes to realize that in the service of the Crusades he has killed innocent people, and that's why he has deserted, his his wartime group in the Crusades. He has deserted from the war, from the Crusades, because he feels that he has killed innocent people, and it took him, I guess, well, in the course of the movie, it took him a decade to realize that he had killed innocent people, but nonetheless, it kind of starts out promising you a story in which, that background of his will play in some psychological fashion, in which he's got to determine if this witch that he's escorting to this monastery is actually guilty or not. But that's not the way this goes. It isn't very far into the story in which you know that, yes, she is either a witch or she is possessed or something and probably should be killed. So there's not much left there to go on, and this turns from a psychological type of story straight up into a demon slaying type story. and a rather bad one at that. So I can kind of agree with this reviewer. This reviewer saying 3 stars nonetheless, and I'll have to disagree and say that I would personally give this 1 star, and mostly that's just because of the boredom factor. Yes, this had plot holes. Yes, it had problems with the acting. Yes, it had some silly stuff that was off-putting, that was maybe an attempt at humor, but it wasn't funny. And, you know, I don't think that's the reason this deserves 1 star. I think it could have still been 2.5 stars even with all of that. But, you know, it commits the cardinal sin, pun intended. It becomes boring. And at the part of this movie in which, you know, the heroes spend their first night on the trail camping, that's when this becomes completely boring, and I actually had to check the time on my phone to see, you know, where we were along the 90-minute or so journey of the film, because, yeah, boredom is the worst sin that this movie commits. But there's a lot of others, and we're going to get to that, so let's move on. We have a 2-star review, October of 2019. The most interesting part of Season of the Witch is how Nicolas Cage seems to be acting in a completely different movie than the rest of the cast. His lines and mannerisms make it feel like he's a time traveler stuck in medieval times. It's funny to watch, but I don't think this dull medieval tale was intended to be a comedy. In fact, I don't think this movie knows what it is. One thing's for sure, though, it's definitely not good. Yeah, I'll agree, but I think it's only 1 star. And, you know, let's just go into detail on that. Yeah, Nicolas Cage, his performance is a little off. I'd say in the first 15 minutes of the film, he throws me out of the suspension of disbelief. He throws me out of the whole thing just by uttering the word shit in the modern vernacular sense, in a line of surprise, and in a part of combat, you know, he says, shit. And, you know, that's a modern thing. And up until that point, everybody had been kind of following along in a Hollywood-style version of keeping to a period type of language. Certainly, it's a Hollywood version of period-type medieval language. It's not supposed to be accurate. It never could be. But yet everybody's following along with that, and then all of a sudden, in a sequence of battle, Nicolas Cage utters shit. Like, oh shit. And that just like, wow, that was the first big error of the movie right there. And I had to make a note of that because it got worse from there. But it took like 10, 12 minutes solid. I don't know, maybe it was about 12 minutes until he uttered that word. And then boom, the first error, and a big one right off the bat, because it gets worse. There's another character that's like a scoundrel or a thief that they kind of bring along as a guide along their journey to this monastery. And he speaks at first also in what could be a Hollywood period type speak that matches everybody else. And then slowly but surely, and it gets worse, he just slips into a Boston accent, like a modern Boston accent, like he's in fact one of the Wahlberg brothers or something. That's the way he talks. And it didn't start out this way. It's like at a certain point he just forgot he was in medieval times, and he started talking like somebody from off the streets of Boston, and that was really bad. And then there was also an attempt by Ron Perlman towards the beginning of the movie to speak with a slight British accent, and then at some point he just gave that up and started speaking like the classic American Ron Perlman that you know him to be and everything else he's done. And, you know, they just gave up. By halfway through the film, they had completely given up, and next thing you know, everybody's in their natural accents and they're not even trying anymore, and it's like the actors just gave up. I don't know what I can say more on that. So let's move on. 5 stars, August of 2019. It was an amazing movie, 10 out of 10. Would watch with the whole family, just amazing. I don't believe you. I'm going to consider that a parody review. 2.5 stars. Perlman and Cage make a great team, one that would have been nice to follow on further adventures in this world, but ultimately this story is rather bland and features some pretty bad effects. Yeah, the bad effects really creep up at the end. You know, this goes from being a very conventional practical effect type of movie, psychological in a way, not very effective, but it's not, you know, it's not too fantastical. Then we get to the end of this, and lo and behold, the witch turns out to be actually possessed by some powerful demon that's almost like a gargoyle type of demon, and this demon is completely CGI, and it is followed up by possessed monks that are like zombie monks, and they're CGI, and it just blows all of its CGI budget in the last 20 minutes of the film, whereas the rest of the movie was just completely practical. I mean, at least to my eye it was, and it just becomes a CGI battle at the end, and it becomes weird in a lot of other ways. But let's move on. 3 stars, unintentionally funny. Spoiler alert, the person they think is a demon is actually a demon. Yeah, you know, the beginning of the movie kind of tries to sow doubt in us and the other characters about whether this witch that they've put into a mobile cage drawn by horses, they're transporting her across the countryside. And, you know, there's plenty of doubt put into the audience about whether she's actually a witch, at least at first. But then not only is it revealed that she is, yes, a witch of some type and that she has to be evil, but at the end of the movie we're actually shown that she's in fact possessed by a gigantic gargoyle type demon. Yeah. 5 stars on this review from June of 25th of 2019. I thought this was a fantastic movie. No, I don't believe you. 3.5 stars. Almost forgot how good this was. It's no Lord of the Rings, but feels like a good blueprint for a movie version of The Witcher. Wow, I hope not. If, you know, The Witcher hasn't come out yet as of December 2019 on Netflix. If it turns out like this, boy, it's going to be fun making fun of it. I'll say that much. 1 star. The priest at the beginning hanged 2 innocent people, but 1 actual witch. Also, apparently, he is a good guy. Ironically, he actually is batting higher than the real Catholic Church as far as innocents to witches ratio. This movie seemed like it was going to end with an ambiguous was she a witch or was it in their heads type ending, but it was so much worse than that. Just like Nicolas Cage's fake British accent that he kept for about 2 lines of dialogue, that plot line was abandoned fairly quickly. Yeah, the Catholic Church, you know, the funny part is the opening scene of the movie, I even made a note while watching it to say that the opening minutes of this movie are just fine. They're good. They keep you interested. There's nothing off-putting about it. It was fine. But yes, it does show that the Catholic Church is ruthlessly hanging and drowning witches, and 2 out of 3 are innocent. But hey, they are getting that 1 out of 3 that's a real witch. But you know, not to say that the ratio is good or bad, but I have to make a note that that was actually the best part of the movie. Everything out after that became problematic, and let's move on. We are on May 15th of 2019. 2 stars. Not as bad as it should be once you get past the ridiculous half-hearted accents of the main characters. Yeah, the Boston accent on the scoundrel character is really bad. He almost even resembles one of the Wahlberg brothers. And it's bad. It's just like, hey, why is he in this movie? And, you know, he just totally gave up. And luckily, he was killed by wolves in a scene. And wolves that have like a CGI face that appears on them where they're like demonic wolves. They're wolves that transform into demonic wolves with this recycled CGI that's put on the wolves' faces. And it's kind of weird how it's obviously recycled and done like it's some kind of dramatic CGI effect, but it's actually kind of weird. And you know, this character with the fake Boston accent is killed off by these wolves. And when that happened, I was actually rooting for the wolves, and I was like, good riddance, because I don't want to hear that nasty Boston accent ever again. No offense to people with strange Boston accents, but it is kind of weird if you're not in Boston to hear this. It doesn't belong in Los Angeles, much less in medieval Europe. I'm sorry. Half a star. May of 2019, agonizing to watch. Netflix is truly a crapshoot. Don't blame Netflix and say it's a crapshoot. You had to know it was pretty bad when you saw it on Netflix. Yes, I saw this on Netflix too. I originally saw this when it came out on DVD in 2011, and I knew it wasn't going to be any blockbuster. And I think I made it halfway through and then found something more interesting to do. And then a week ago, I watched this on Netflix streaming because it was easy for me to just boot it up on my laptop and find out just why I hadn't sat through the whole thing. And I knew it wasn't going to be good, and I'm not blaming Netflix. I think, you know, off on another side topic here, you're going to see the ratio of bad movies increase on Netflix even more because we're in the streaming wars in which everybody's scrambling to lock up all the halfway decent content onto their own separate streaming services. And so once upon a time, Netflix had just about everything out there available. So yes, it still had these bad movies, but they weren't as noticeable. And now that everybody's locking up their stuff between, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Amazon, Hulu, Warner Brothers, NBC Universal, CBS All Access, you name it. Seems like every week there's a new one announced. Of course, they're not all going to succeed, but they don't know that. So in the meantime, the ratio of good to bad stuff is getting worse on Netflix, and it's probably getting worse on Amazon Prime and everything else because the first thing you want to lock up are the good movies, right? And the good franchises. And so Netflix is, the ratio is looking pretty bad right now, but that's a side topic. Don't blame Netflix for this. It wasn't produced by Netflix. 3.5 stars, a good movie to pass the time. These other idiots prefer 101 Dalmatians or some other BS. It's all BS. Well, that's a good point. It's all BS. It's all fiction. Now, I'm not going to compare this to 101 Dalmatians because this is not the same genre. Now, if this had been a comedy, that would be different. That's the other disappointing thing about this movie is that there's nothing that's laugh out loud funny here where you can crack open a couple of beers and enjoy it as a so bad it's good film. It's not like that. It just becomes boring. That first night out on the trail that they start camping, it becomes boring from there. And, even the action scenes at the end where they're fighting this demonic, this flying gargoyle-like demon, it's really tiresome because you just have these possessed monks dropping out of the air from this high cathedral ceiling, and they just keep dropping out in front of the main characters, and the main characters just keep decapitating them, and instead of blood flying out of their throats when they're decapitated, it's like a CGI water effect that sprays out of their, some magical blood that sprays out of their throats, which is convenient to keep the rating, but it's also supposed to be some kind of demonic fluid inside of them or whatnot. And while we're on that topic, let's just say that the demon character himself, just the way he speaks, it sounds like some kind of strange hood rat gang member from the streets of New York talking in a demon voice, and it's very weird and doesn't belong there in any way. And there's more to say on the ridiculousness of the demon and his motivations, but let's move on. 2 stars, May of 2019. It was in my Netflix queue for a long time, and I was like, why not? I will not be watching it again. It had a cool vibe, a cool new death at the very end that I had not seen before, but let's be real, the acting, the plot, come on, it was a decent watch, but I'm not watching it again. I'll say 2 stars is too high. It's 1 star, and this reviewer is probably referring to, what is a cool idea I hadn't seen before either, in which the demon that's like a gigantic or a man-sized winged gargoyle, he can wrap you up in his gargoyle wings and hold you inside and then just roast you into ashes with this flame effect. And it's actually pretty cool, and it's a pretty cool demonic combat power. And I haven't seen this used in a movie before, and it's probably is like one of the very few cool things in this movie that's worth anything. The CGI in that regard isn't that bad, but the rest of it is just like ridiculous, all surrounding this cool, demonic death roasting power. So let's move on. 3 stars, March of 2019. No idea why it's rated so poorly. Not a masterpiece, but between Cage and Ron, it's a decent late-night action movie with a pretty cool twist. Well, you're not watching the same movie if you have no idea why it's rated so poorly. Let's just say it promises one type of movie and then becomes another at the end, and then the logic itself is a complete fail. Let's just look at the simple plot logic. At the end of this, it's revealed that this demonic gargoyle, this demon, who has the power to fly around and attack people physically, and it's a physical creature that can possess the body of a girl, right? Well, the whole idea was that this demon needed to possess the girl to trick the Crusaders to take it to this monastery, because at this monastery, this castle monastery in the mountains, the monks have some kind of ancient religious script which shows how to defeat demons, and the demon wanted to get to that book to have the power for itself in some weird, unexplained way. the demon was going to do something apocalyptic with this book once it got it. Okay, fine. But then how come the demon needed to go through this convoluted process of possessing a village girl and then having the village girl taken to the castle? Why didn't the demon just like fly from its portal from hell and just fly to the castle itself, since it already knew where everything was in the story and it knew everything about everything? Why didn't it just fly its way to the castle and take the book right off the bat? Why did we even have to have this entire plot? It makes no sense. It's a huge plot hole and it's completely ridiculous. So that's why I say this is rotten, aside from all the other flaws. But let's move on. We are in January 5th of 2019 on this review. 1.5 star. Such an unuseful movie. Yeah, that's one way to look at it. 3 stars, November of 2018. Surprisingly okay, horrific tale of medieval witch hunting. Spoiler alerts, Cage and Perlman are two moral objectors, deserters from the Crusades, who are found out in some Hungarian-like city and taken prisoner, as if deserters were a thing in the Crusades, as if word of their deserting would travel all the way to a medieval town in Central Europe. Yeah. By the way, the town is overrun by plague, so in order to gain a pardon from the cardinal, Christopher Lee covered in boils, yeah, it is pretty ridiculous, and that's another thing. It kind of fails at the beginning because, yes, these two semi-famous knights in the crusade, they travel to Europe, they desert from the crusades, and yeah, all of a sudden they're, presumably moving at the fastest speed you can on horseback, right? They arrive in some medieval European setting, and the local priest or Vatican representative of the Vatican Church, of course, on site knows that they're deserters and immediately imprisons them. Yeah, right. How does word of their desertion get ahead of them? Just on that, it fails alone. And how are they recognized? Who would know who the hell they are? It's just ridiculous. In the movie, it shows that a squire boy like dropped Nicolas Cage's package that had his sword inside, and he saw the hilt of the sword, and the hilt of the sword had a crest, and somehow that squire boy recognized the crest, and immediately that's how the local priest or whoever, representative of the Catholic Church there in that medieval town, automatically knew they were deserters and who they were. That's really ridiculous, but that's how the movie tried to kind of hand wave that logic away. It failed because it was on my mind a lot too. 2 stars. Bad movie. The plot is uninteresting and unoriginal. The action is slow and cheap. The visual effects are mostly dull, and the performances are bland aside from Perlman. Well, no, I disagree. Perlman, he's not aside. Like, Perlman's performance is completely bland. He doesn't do anything special, positive or negative. He's just there as Ron Perlman playing Ron Perlman. Don't say he's not bland. He's just as bland as everybody else. In fact, every actor and actress in this thing could have been replaced with somebody else because they don't do anything good, bad, special, standout-wise. They're just there doing what the director told them to do. Completely bland, all of them, including Perlman. And I would also say, yeah, the action is pretty cheap. In fact, there's a convoluted scene that is supposed to be all tension-filled and exciting, in which they, in a cliched way we've seen a million times before, they attempt to cross some gigantic cavern in the mountains that's got a rather wide rope bridge across it, like something you would see in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, only a wide bridge that you can get a carriage across. And of course, you know what's going to happen. The carriage is going to fall through. The bridge is going to fall apart. So in a convoluted way, Nicolas Cage comes up with a plan to send the carriage across with the girl by itself. And they kind of tow it. Ron Perlman and Nicolas Cage get the weird idea to like send the horses across one at a time and then use themselves, the two characters, to pull the cart across the bridge. And then when it gets halfway across, they change their minds and have the horses winch it the rest of the way across from the other side. This doesn't make any sense. It's a complete contrived, ridiculous way, nonsensical way anybody would try to cross this bridge, and it's only done for the sake of having a bridge scene that we've seen a million times before, done better in other movies. It's completely stupid. As a matter of fact, okay, Why didn't, yes, Nicolas Cage go ahead and send the horses across on their own and then have the horses just tow the carriage across from the other side without all the other crap that went on in between with them trying to haul it across by hand? Please, I don't even want to spend more time on how ridiculous and cliched and contrived that whole thing was. Let's move on. 2.5 stars, July of 2018. Nicolas Cage, who is actually Nicholas Coppola. That's right, his uncle is Francis Ford Coppola. Oh, wow, shock, we didn't know that. But anyway, Nicholas, thanks to his family, has managed to at best take great movies and make them good. This, like so many other movies he has been in, would have been a hit if he was not casted in the lead. Casting is the difference from a hit movie with sequels and a straight to Netflix movie. I can think of 3 or 4 actors off the top of my head that would have drawn people to the theaters to watch this when it was first released. No, completely disagree. Not only is this only 1 star, but like I said before, nothing about this needed or didn't need Nicolas Cage. They could have replaced all of these people with other actors. This movie would have been no more good or bad. The movie itself, the script itself is bad. So please, even if the bad accents hadn't been there and they had really performed perfectly, these actors, it wouldn't have saved this. The script and plot logic failed, and it was boring. It got boring like 20 minutes into it, and that is the worst sin that even the Catholic Church should acknowledge is a sin. That sin is called boredom. Boredom with a capital B. It should be the 8th deadly sin, in my opinion. 3 stars. There's no such thing as peripheral vision in movies, is there? It's a good cheat. Another cheat in this movie is the miscalculation of the amount of horses in a couple of scenes. Yeah, that's, it's got issues like that. It's also got an issue where there's a obviously easy to spot fake crossbow in the hands of one of the characters, one that can't possibly be a real crossbow, and it's not even being held properly yet, and then it refires twice without reloading at one point too. Yeah, but I will say one thing, at least the swords looked real. I don't know if they were, but as swords in a Hollywood movie, they and I looked hard at them. They didn't look fake, but the crossbow definitely did. 4 stars. This is a very good movie. Ignore the haters. No, you can't ignore us. But then again, I'm not a hater. I don't find this anything more than boring, so it's kind of not a hate thing. It's just a boredom thing. March of 2018, 1.5 stars. Nicolas Cage and Ron Perlman star as aging, tired, and bored crusaders who desert the Teutonic Order after a successful siege against a stronghold, garrisoned with nothing more than young women and children. Weighed down with the guilt of their own murder of a young woman, Perlman and Cage return to Villach in Austria in the recent wake of a successful witch hunt, which has led to the escape and capture of a witch who they believe is responsible for Black Death, which is sweeping across Europe. Yeah, look at that huge plot synopsis that this reviewer left. I mean, thanks to him for illustrating one important point in that, yes, that would describe the movie, except the movie changes into an entirely different movie when you get to the end, making my point stand that this would be rotten on that alone. So here we have, yeah, it's Nicolas Cage keeps waking up from a dream or a nightmare in which he relives the stabbing of a woman, an impaling of a woman with a sword in this, in this fort that's defended by only women and children. He killed this woman, and he just keeps reliving this in his dream. And this would seem like the perfect thing to juxtapose against whether the witch that he was hauling from one point to another was actually guilty. But they don't do that. They don't do that. They show you right away that the witch is a witch or she's evil. And so, you don't even get the chance to get that kind of drama going on. It kind of derails that and fails too. So it kind of presents this backstory of Nicolas Cage, and it keeps trying to hammer the point home that he's conflicted about, killing innocents in the Crusades. And yet it wastes that. It could have used that, but it didn't use that. It kind of just put that there and just didn't do anything with it. Another fail. 5 stars from September 10th of 2017. It was a fantastic movie. Great action, great acting, very good story. I recommend it. And I recommend you don't believe that, because this person I don't even think watched this movie. 3 stars. They ruined the film with 3D special effects. Plot was good. No, the plot had some real big problems, major problems to kill it down. The CGI, the 3D effects at the end, Yeah, they didn't help anything, but the plot alone didn't make any sense once you found out that the demon did all this stuff when it could have just gone there and got what it wanted without doing all this stuff. Just killed everything anyway. 4 stars, June 2017. This movie is better than the ridiculous numbers given it. I found it quite watchable. Nah, you must have been really tired or drunk because I found it quite boring. And like I said, the first time I saw this when it was a new movie, I know I didn't make it all the way through. I had other things to do. Okay, so 4 stars, May of 2017. Kind of love how fucked up it get before whatever you know that your mother sucks cocks in hell engine starts. Yeah, this reviewer's this this reviewer is referring to how yeah at one point the demon is like cursing in that fashion. You know, it kind of goes from being a psychological evil type of thing to being almost a parody of The Exorcist in a few small parts, and it's kind of weird. 3.5 stars, February of 2017. Movie was entertaining to say the least. You've got to look past the witch part though. Too many folks today think that women are witches, so they get confused. Really? Like in this movie, this person is possessed. I don't want to ruin it for you, but this is definitely not about women, lol. I don't know. The only woman I've known that I thought might be possessed, and she still might be, is she's a known politician that hasn't decided whether or not she's going to run yet again for a third time to be president. But putting her out of the picture, I don't know of any women that I suspected to be witches, but let's move on. 0.5 star, September of 2016. 0.5 star. This movie isn't even entertaining from a bad movie standpoint, except for maybe the CGI wolves and some of the wicked special effects throughout the movie. Well, I'll disagree there. The CGI demon faces that, you know, like shrunk onto the wolves while they attacked, that was recycled and reused on multiple wolves from different mirrored images, and it was kind of weird the first time, and it became stupid after the third or fourth time I saw it, and it showed how cheap the movie was. When it came up with a CGI effect, it just wanted to use it as many times as possible, and it didn't really do anything. It didn't make the movie scarier. It just made it kind of weird. But let's continue on. Cage doesn't even get any freak out moments. Yeah, Cage doesn't do anything. He doesn't do his classic Nicolas Cage weirdness. He doesn't go over the top. He doesn't get crazy. Like I said, he could have been replaced with anybody else and it would have been the same. He just kind of like did what he was told to do and just like kind of played just a generic bland character. That's what everybody did here. Let's continue. Oh, and spoil alert, they spend most of the movie wondering if this girl is truly a witch or not, and the twist is that she's a demon. What? It gets 0.5 star for a cool opening scene. That's it. Cage and Perlman, by the way, are introduced to us as fighters in the Crusade. I agree completely with this guy, and he mentioned the same thing I did. The opening scene was the best part of this movie. It made sense. If the rest of the movie had continued on with this opening scene, oh, it would have been fantastic. I might have given this 3 stars, but that was it. The very first opening scene in the movie was the only thing good in this, and then everything after was just me filling in my notebook with problems, and a lot of problems. 1 star, Nicolas Cage, what the heck is this? Season of the Witch looks terrible and is terrible. I laughed so hard because of how bad the movie was. Well, I wish it were like that and I had laughed, but I didn't laugh one time during this movie, so there's no laughter to be found. I'm sorry. It's just boring. January of 2016, 0.5 star. The history of the battles it mentions in the opening sequence are all off by a couple of 100 years. The acting performances are shocking, and the accents are all over the place. Some of the American, some are English, some are a mixture of the two. The storyline could have provided a half-decent film with the right cast, but it's been so poorly done. Yeah, I agree. It's like the actors gave up and just reverted to their natural accents at a point. They tried it first, but then just gave up. I don't know why. Maybe they realized that they weren't going to get paid on the schedule they thought they were. Who knows? It's very weird. January 2016, 1 star. Ron Perlman is the only highlight here, but he can't save an entire movie that is badly made and boring to watch. It's the worst kind of bad, so bad that it's awful. Yeah, it's so bad that it's boring. 1 star. July of 2015. Wow, what a time jump, huh? 1 star, nothing interesting here. Move along. Well, I'm going to move along a little further just to see, since we're back in 2015, what we can find. May of 2015, 1.5 stars. Season of the Witch is a disappointingly dull and lifeless horror that fails to utilize Nick Cage's larger-than-life acting ability because he isn't up for it, putting the final nail in its coffin. Yeah, if Nick Cage had done something crazy, there would have been something to laugh about, but no, he doesn't do much of anything. 3 stars. One of the less worst Nicolas Cage movies. Well, if you like to make fun of Nicolas Cage and make fun of how bad he does in different bad movies, then yeah, there's nothing to see here. It's just boring. There's so much more material to find and laugh at his performances. This one is just blah. It's not 3 stars. It's definitely a 1-star movie. 3 stars. The critics are so into top-notch, they wouldn't admit some cheap fun. I found the story much more interesting than 300 or even Man of Steel or the whole superhero crap. This film actually worked better where the special effects were minimal, except for the finale that was rightly satisfying and plain scary fun. Wow, it's like you're watching a different movie, or you're watching this movie in an alternate dimension, but let's continue. This is a film that looks like nothing but has many fine qualities. We get to feel the dumbness and the cruelty of the Dark Ages. We have an innocent-looking girl that is full of power and wit. We have an innocent-looking girl that is completely boring and pointless, and she doesn't look innocent at all, by the way. It's quite the opposite of that. She looks evil from the beginning, and we're supposed to entertain that she might not be, but no, I never got that feeling. I got the feeling that she was always just a miserable, evil person, possessed or not. And she's nothing special. The actress that plays her is completely forgettable. I've never seen her in anything else, at least that I remember, and maybe there's a reason for that. Yeah, they're comparing this to 300 and Man of Steel. Well, I'll say Man of Steel was pretty disappointing from a person that likes Superman movies. And 300, I'm sorry, but 300 had a lot of CGI that actually worked. So I don't know where they're going with this. They are completely out to lunch. Here's another one from May of 2015. 3 stars, 3 whole big stars. The critics are so into... Okay, that's a repeat. They tricked me on that one. Repeat again. 1 star from April of 2015. Wow, just wow. Nicolas Cage really won't turn down a script, will he? Well, I think at one point he owed the IRS and he was working for Uncle Sam, and I don't know if he still was in 2011, but yeah, he could not afford to turn down things, because if he had turned down movies at a certain point, he was going to go to jail, and the IRS told him, you're not going to turn down work. Now, I don't know if that was still the case in 2011, but this... it's hard to say. At one long stretch of years, he was not legally allowed to turn down work unless he wanted to spend the rest of his time in a prison for tax evasion. So who knows if that's the case on this one. But yeah, he doesn't try. He's not certainly doing anything. He's just going along and doing what the director told him to do, and reading his lines, I guess. It looks like he knew his lines. That's about it. 1 star. This is a really bad film that is probably ideal if you just want something on in the background while you do something more interesting. I agree. My favorite problem with this movie, setting aside the gaping plot holes, Sci-Fi Channel special effects, appalling choreography, and horrible, horrible acting, was the accents. This is a film where American actor Nicolas Cage, playing a European knight in Europe, adopts a British accent. Yeah, but that's not even the worst part. What about the pudgy Wahlberg, Mark Wahlberg looking relative character, who's not a relative of the Wahlbergs, but he looks like he should be, with a Boston accent? That was the weirdest part of this whole thing. Never mind Nicolas Cage's, using the word shit as a pejorative and all this. That Boston accent, man, that was classic. I'm glad the Wolves killed that character. 1.5 stars. Nicolas Cage must transport a suspected witch in this cliche fantasy flick. That's all you got for your 1.5 stars? Oh, you should have detailed a little bit more. 0.5 star, January 2015. I don't think anyone in the film believes anything that is going on in it. Yeah, I don't think so either, other than that they're believing they're going to get paid somehow. 1 star. Oh, Nicolas Cage, you make such shitty movies. Actually, he didn't make this, but he chooses such shitty movies. You've got that right. 1.5 stars from December of 2014. German, but I'll take your word for it. maybe. December of 2014 again, 3.5 stars. A 10% rating by critics tells me that I must have a fondness for failed films, as if I didn't know that already, because I actually quite liked this one. A fantasy action film that has a Dungeons and Dragons feel to it, as a handful of knights set off on a journey to take a young girl to trial, given she is perceived to be demonstrating the characteristics of a witch and guilty of summoning the plague to every nearby village, battling wolves, treacherous conditions. Yeah, it sounds good, doesn't it? That's kind of like not a lie, that description there. But I'm afraid it doesn't really tell you the whole story, which is this is completely rotten. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to take a look at this. And we have an 11% on the tomato meter, justified. We have a 30% on the audience score. And, it's fair, but it would also be fair if it was a 15% on the audience score. Anywhere between 15 and 30% would be fair. I don't know who would consider this entertaining because, like I said, the first time I, like the other reviewer I just read, had it on in the background and just had other things to do. So that's my conclusion. Find something else to do, and I will see you again on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.